Johan, for people who don't know, and there may not be many people, but just in case, do you mind introducing yourself quickly? Who are you? What do you do?
I'm a Joomla co-founder. I got involved in Joomla in Mambo in 2001 or 2002. I joined the core team in 2005, went through the fork from Mambo to Joomla. Was core team member until 2008, 2009, and did a lot of work on Joomla 1.5, writing a lot of code for it for the first 3 years, 2005, 2008. Right now, we're running Joomlatools, so we build extensions for Joomla, which hopefully most of the people here know, and otherwise they can go to joomlatools.com and figure that out.
Where are you based?
Belgium, in Europe and Belgium.
Cool. Okay, so you've been in this game a long time, and you've also been experimenting with outside of Joomla as well. I think you've just released a version of one of your Joomla extensions for WordPress, and
yeah.
Also, I think your Joomlatools site was in Jekyll at one point.
Yeah, that's just what brings this whole Joomlatools Pages thing about. We had our site redone at some point in Jekyll because it was easier for our designers to work with. And actually, I wasn't happy with that. I wanted it back in Joomla, so this is how Pages got started.
Oh, what was the thinking there? So I guess originally you had Joomlatools.com running on a standard Joomla install. And so what was the thinking there? What inspired you to initially move the site over to Jekyll?
Well, because for us, performance was very important. That was a key reason. Getting it to run very fast, because when you're online, and for us, the most important, it's a presentational site. So it's a site that provides product information and provides information for people to sell, to buy our product. So we want to have the site up all the time, and we want to have it very, very fast. Having a static site helped with that. And Joomla wasn't necessarily able to provide that performance. Then the second problem was we are developers, so we don't necessarily like to go into the backend in Joomla to write a blog post or an article. We just like to put it into Markdown and ideally put it into Git so that we could properly deploy the site and have multiple instances running. We were running, and now we are running actually 3 different instances of the site. We're running the production site. We're running a staging environment where new content is being tested and new features are being tested, and we're running a local production environment. So those 3 environments are all coming from the same Git repository. That was one problem that we had. And then our designers, they were fighting more and more against Joomla than with it at some point. So they wanted to have the freedom to design the site as they wanted it. So they didn't want to get into conflicts with styling that Joomla was producing or HTML that Joomla was producing. They just wanted to have data that they could style and mark up themselves. And Jekyll was a really great solution for that until some point.
So I guess initially Jekyll brought a lot of benefits. You were able to run everything from a single GitHub repo and move in and out to the staging site or the live site or your local host. But then it seems almost as if you ran across some problems with that and it wasn't quite satisfactory.
Yeah, then it basically in the beginning it all works really, really well, right? So you have the speed of content management or of content editing, because you're not really managing content in a traditional sense. You're just like creating Markdown files and putting them in the Git repository. You can deploy that very easily. Like you can maintain it. The site is fast. Like everything works until you start dealing with forms. Like in a static site, you cannot put a form in. So you have a contact form, but then you need to figure out a third-party solution to run your form on your site. So there are multiple web services online that help you with that, that help solve that problem. But that costs you additionally, and it didn't really provide all the things. We had a lot of problems with spam and things like that. So it became complex to even get some information through the site submitted. If I wanted to set up a review form for somebody to submit a review to Joomlatools, that was quite a hassle. That was one problem. And the second problem was that Jekyll became slow. Our site grew bigger. There was more and more content going into the site. So the problem with Jekyll is that it cannot do what we call an incremental build. So you cannot really say, I'm making a small change here, only go and rebuild those pages. It always rebuilds all of it. So it takes seconds to rebuild. Right?
Yeah.
That's the big difference between a static system and a dynamic system. In a dynamic system, you can really say, go and render me this specific page and leave all the rest where it is, because that's fine. In a static system, you need to render your whole site again. And if you have a site with a lot of content, that can take up to minutes.
And a static site has some other drawbacks. For example, it's difficult to run a search function on it.
For example, like you have that problem. And it's also quite difficult to separate, to say which pieces of the site needs to be cached long and which needs to be cached short, because you're transforming it all in HTML. So all the HTML is uploaded to the server and is cached in the same way. So you can say, my site needs to be cached until I change it again, basically, but you don't really have any flexibility there.
So you seem to have hit on a hybrid model, as if there were some problems with a purely dynamic site, so, like Joomla, for example. It has some real limitations. And there are some problems with the traditional static site model. And I guess you've ended up with some kind of a hybrid with well, talk me through it. Is it a dynamic site producing static content? You seem to have called it a page builder.
Yeah, it's really
worlds.
hard. It's really hard to name things, because they're so, like, I was thinking about what am I going to name it. I need to figure out and explain what it isn't. Because in the end, Pages is now so much that it's not just one thing anymore. So basically, Pages works exactly like Joomla works. But there is one big difference. Whatever Pages generates is cached on the file system as a single page, and can then be served from there. So in a sense, Pages works a little bit like a CDN.
Okay.
Like if you know what Varnish does, like similar, right? So you let it render Joomla. Joomla basically works like this. Somebody requests a page, let's say an article, let's say the one I'm showing here. If this is not in Pages, but if this was in Joomla, somebody comes to this URL and says, okay, give me this page. Joomla will then give the page back to the client requesting it, the browser requesting it. And Joomla will send cache headers back that basically says, you cannot cache this page at all. You cannot do anything with this page. You cannot store it in your browser, or you cannot store it in a CDN. You need to come back each time for a new one the moment that you need it. So there's a lot of bandwidth being lost, and there's a lot of time being spent requesting pages from Joomla. This is also why Joomla and a lot of CMS systems by definition are slower, right? Because each time new request, new page needs to come back to the browser. So that's the main problem. That's the advantage of a static site, because you're generating the HTML and then you're uploading it to the server and then it's served from there. But that also comes with a lot of disadvantages that I just outlined. So I want to find a middle ground. So the first problem that we had to solve was build a proper caching system for Joomla. Like, how can you make Joomla fast?
Joomla, for example, does not work well even with Varnish or
right
other layers. It doesn't have a good relationship with cache systems normally.
Yeah, Joomla wasn't really built in that era, right? So when Joomla and Mambo were built, the caching specs, so the HTTP specifications, HTTP 1.0 at that time didn't really have a caching specification. So CDNs doesn't really exist. The whole caching, the way of caching and caching on the internet didn't really exist. So there was not really a worry about that. We just go to the server, dynamically create the page and bring it back. Today, everything is about performance. Like, we have really great CDN solutions. Google penalizes sites that are slow. So you need to build a system that is fast. And then caching comes in.
We had a long conversation with Sander and Martine, who run a company called Perfect Web Team in the Netherlands. And they were saying a lot of their customers now will come to them and say, this is our performance budget. We need our site to run at this exact speed. and then they have to kind of work backwards from that performance budget to figure out how to reach it and what features they're allowed to add in order to meet that budget. And they were saying that quite often to reach the budget, they have to make Joomla produce static pages. Joomla itself is not capable of meeting some of these budgets, and they have to spit out static pages.
True. And it's a combination of making Joomla faster, and then also your design side needs to be done properly. There's a lot of design that also goes into it. But like on the pure Joomla performance side, like example here, if you can see it, right? So you see the line that I'm highlighting here has a performance of 1 second. So this is just pages installed in Joomla, rendering this page on my local machine, not too super fast. It takes a second.
Oh, so could you quickly explain what we're looking at here? Are we looking at a stock Joomla site or a Joomla site with pages?
This is Joomla site with pages, and this is just a page that I'm rendering that you see on the left.
Okay.
So yeah, the code for that is very simple. Then I need to switch. Maybe I can do that quickly. So I show you the code for it, and then we know what we're talking about. So this is this page, right? So this is basically how Pages works. I have created a page. In this case, for my Joomla site now, it's actually the index page, the home page of the site. Basically, the first page that you get into, Pages can do that. Basically comes in and says, okay, this is a page that I know about. I'm going to render it. Then you can define a title for the page. You can define a summary. There's a lot more that I'll show later that you can define. And then this is just an HTML page. So I've just written it here in HTML. You could use PHP in between, or you can move to Markdown and show that later. And then the second thing I'm doing here, this is an example of a menu system, but that's maybe for a little bit. I'm rendering a menu system. So this is just a page, a single page that I'm rendering. And if we look at that on the site itself, then we go back there, then we end up here. So then we see this, right? So that page takes about a second to render. What Pages is doing here is Pages is basically taking this page, rendering out this whole menu system. These are basically all the the pages that I created for this demo. I render them out here. It's easier for me to click through later. And then he injects that back into Joomla, into the Joomla template. So this is just a Joomla site. If I make it a little bit bigger, then you see this. This is your stock Joomla 3.9 latest release installation. So that's it. Okay. So when we're talking about the performance, so if you look at the performance here, then you see stock, this runs at 1.3 seconds because there is no caching whatsoever. And how can you see that? If you click on it, then here you can see cache control, private, no cache, no store. Right? This is the HTTP header that basically informs the browser or any other server in between. You cannot do anything with this. You cannot cache it, you cannot store it. You need to consider this content private. Each time you want this content again, you need to come back to me as a server and request it again. That's basically what this cache control header says, right? So what I'll do now, I'll switch again, just to show that because it's an important point. So what I'll do is I'll turn on caching. I'll turn on the HTTP cache in Pages. I'm setting the cache time for the browser cache to 0 because otherwise the browser is going to cache it. I can show that later because then it becomes very fast because then the browser actually caches it. And I'll set the cache in Pages to 60 seconds, so 60 minutes basically. It's an hour, 3,600. And then we go back.
Okay, so got a question from Tristina here.
Sure.
And she's asking about the workflow for allowing your customers or your clients to edit pages. So we've seen what the pages look like. What would the process be to allow your customers to access and update these pages?
So the idea here is like in this case, this page is written down, so it sits on the file system. You cannot very easily make somebody edit this, of course, because it's a static file. For us, that works really well. For a lot of you, that won't. So Pages is not necessarily a flat file CMS. You can store data on the file system, but you can equally well get data from any other location. And maybe after I finish explaining the cache, I can show you different locations and where data can come from. So you have an idea how this all works, right? I can get data out of a Joomla database. I can get data out of a web service. I can get data from a Google spreadsheet. I can get the data and render it on the site.
Before we started recording, you mentioned that you ran the Joomlatools site, pulling information from a Joomla database, pulling information from Help Scout for your user tickets, pulling information from all sorts of different resources.
Correct. So Pages is it's not just a flat. This is why it's really hard to name it, and I don't really want to put the name on it, because it's not a flat file CMS. It's not a static site generator. It's not the headless CMS. It can be all of those, depending on how you configure it and how you work with Pages.
Maybe the audience have some suggestions today.
So here's the difference, right? So we went from 1.3 seconds to 300 milliseconds by enabling the cache. So if you now look at the header, then you will see a different header. It's going to say max H is 0 and S max H is 7,200. Which basically means you cannot cache it in the browser. This is the max H, but you can cache it anywhere else. So on a CDN. So in this case, Pages is going to cache it on the Joomla server itself. But this also means that if you would put a Cloudflare in between, that Cloudflare can start caching these pages, because Cloudflare goes like, S max H, which means for shared cache max H says, okay, I can cache this. And then your whole site becomes really, really fast. That's what you see at Joomlatools.com.
I was going to say a live example for anyone who wants to check this out at the moment is Joomlatools.com. If you head over there and look at the source code for that site, you'll be able to see what Joomlatools Pages is producing.
So now you can see it here, right? So now I have turned on, I have enabled the max H, basically saying now the server can cache it and the browser can cache it too. So I'm allowing a cache of 15 minutes in the browser, and this is 2 hours on the server. And what you see here is that it's now 1 millisecond, because each time I'll reload this page, it's not coming from the server anymore, it's coming from the browser cache. And you can also see that here, this cache. So that makes the site fast. If somebody comes to the site and you put this cache on for a couple of hours, and he comes back, then he will be served pages from his local cache.
We've got a question from Bjorn. Bjorn, do you mind asking your question? Your question was, is it possible for Joomla to render the pages automatically to Pages?
Yeah, so let me show you a little example of that. So where data can come from, right? So that we know what we're talking about. I'm gonna.
I guess Bjorn's question is, if you're typing in the Joomla admin and you press publish, will Joomla then automatically spit out a new version of the page?
Yes, and then it becomes how you have set up the cache. Okay. So this is the thing, right? A lot of people have this idea that I'm making a change to my article and immediately need to see that effect on my site. If you want that, you cannot cache. If you want to have real-time changes on your site, you can never cache, because that means that you automatically need to come back and the changes need to be shown. So then you cannot get the performance that you want. So you need to figure out a middle ground. Like for example, with Joomlatools.com, we deploy changes to the server, and at that moment we clear the cache. I'm now working on a system where Pages will actually be smart enough to understand that something has changed. This is what more advanced caching systems can do. If you make a change to an article, the database itself will know that something in this database table where articles sit in has changed. So Pages can then basically go and do a very tiny query to the database and say, okay, database, tell me when was the last time that this database table got changed? And if that time was younger than what Pages has in cache, then it will regenerate that page. So then it starts becoming fluent. Now I can try to show all that, but it will become quite complex right away because there's so much that Pages can do. But that will become possible. Right.
It's almost as if in the normal Joomla or CMS platform that ease of use comes first and speed and performance is fourth or fifth in terms of the priorities. Whereas a system like Joomlatools Pages, the performance is much higher up in the priority list. And as a result, there may be a couple of inconveniences, such as needing to break the cache in order to see your new
I do a lot of car racing websites in the racing industry and all that. So when you're updating stuff at the racetrack, it's really important that it's shown immediately, because it's all time sensitive stuff. What I've instituted is I found a plugin from Regular Labs. It's a cache cleaner, and anytime anyone updates an article or makes a change on the website, anytime they hit save, it actually clears out the cache. And we're also using the Cloudflare as well, and Cloudflare recognizes the cache was cleared, and it shows a fresh page, and that's been really helpful for us.
True. The problem with that is that you're actually not using Cloudflare to the 100 extent. Now, then this becomes a talk about caching, which I could go into, though it becomes quite more technical. You're not using Cloudflare to the full extent. When you put Cloudflare on a default Joomla site, you're not caching the output that Joomla generates. What you're caching is assets. You're caching JavaScript files, CSS files, images, depending on how Cloudflare is configured. But the HTML, Cloudflare by default will not cache. For two reasons. Your Joomla isn't telling Cloudflare to cache, and two, you need to make additional modifications to Cloudflare to do that. This is what we do on Joomlatools.com. So Joomla has a built-in caching system where it caches some things, and it's going to clean all of it. Like, it's not going to clean it in parts, but it's going to clean all of it. That will work for smaller sites for sure. But if performance really, really matters, you want to be able to, one, clean incrementally, meaning you clean only what needs to be cleaned. And two, you don't want to have a cache where if I clean, all my cache is gone, because then suddenly my whole site becomes slow on that moment. Like, suppose that you're a web publisher like Forbes or whatever, and you're publishing millions and millions of articles. Each time somebody makes an edit, all your cache goes out, means that your site is never actually cached, because you're making so many changes that there is nothing in cache at any point. It keeps getting cleaned all the time. So, for small sites, these kind of things work. For bigger sites, it becomes different and becomes more important to do it different. And then for us, for Joomlatools, it's like, I wanna solve this problem that you described, but I wanna solve it in such a way that the site is as fast all the time. And I'm doing now changes in the next release of Pages to actually solve this. We're actually going to make the site even faster than most sites by doing nifty tricks with JavaScript in the site itself to prefetch pages in the background before a user actually clicks on a link, which is really cool stuff. Modern browsers today can do quite a lot. Like if I hover over a link in a browser, it takes approximately, it takes between 350 and 800 milliseconds before I click on it. So if I'm hovering, and I'm hovering for, let's say, 250 to 300 milliseconds, if at that point the browser starts loading the page will be loaded almost instantly, because the moment the user clicks, he will feel it come up, but it was already there. These are tricks that we're now playing with to actually get the whole browsing experience even faster. And then this same solution will also allow you to load pages in the background. You can basically say, if a user comes to my site, then load all the most important pages, all the main menu items. Let's say I have 10 main menu items on Joomla Tools. We have our main menu. There are 10 pages being loaded in the background. But because these pages are coming from a CDN, they're actually super fast. Like, it takes only 50 milliseconds per page to load. So the majority of the content of that site is already loaded before you actually have done anything on it.
So you're almost guessing which page they're going to visit next. They're probably going to visit one of these top 10 pages or the link they're hovering over.
I'm not guessing yet, but like I'm basically saying, okay, take my main menu and all the pages in the main menu, and in our case, which is the next release coming out for Joomla that will be 10 pages approximately, and all the rest are going to work on hover. So if you go over a link and you hover for 300 milliseconds, then it will start fetching it in the background.
That's awesome.
All of that comes, of course, from the CDN. It comes from Cloudflare, and on Cloudflare, my response time is approximately 40 milliseconds. So then my problem is, how can I make sure that Cloudflare is refreshed? Because as you point out, you go into the backend with the regular apps plugin and clean everything. That doesn't necessarily clean Cloudflare in that sense. It cleans Joomla. In my case, I need to clean the page in Cloudflare when it changes. Now, how we do that is, there are two ways that we do it, and I'll show you one. So I'll go back to my browser. Go back here. I need to get it out of cache first. There. All right. So it's now gonna create the page, and that takes a while, right? So it took, like, it took a while. As you can see here, there is a caching system that sits in pages that works like Varnish works and like Cloudflare works. It knows the cache state. So in this case, it says cache state miss, meaning I had to regenerate this page from scratch. I didn't have it in cache yet. All right, so that's a miss. The next time that it comes in, but it's not going to come from browser cache, so I cannot show you that. But if I would refresh this page, basically click the browser refresh button, then something else is happening. When you click a browser refresh button, the browser is sending this. It's doing cache control max H is 0, which basically means you cannot take the page that this browser has in cache. You need to revalidate it. You need to go back to where it came from and ask if the page that I have in cache is still valid. And then pages will come back and say, yes, whatever you have in cache, oops, whatever you have in cache is still valid. I have refreshed it. So this page was cached on the file system. You do a refresh request. Pages basically goes, I have this page in cache. Great. Now I need to figure out if I can give it to you, if it's still fresh. Pages does a couple of checks for that, which are less resource intensive, and will then decide to give the page back, yes or no. If the page is still fresh, it will give whatever he has in cache. If the page is not fresh anymore and it needs to be regenerated, then he will get all the data again from the different data sources and regenerate the page. That could take up a little bit more than a second. So that's one way that browsers can refresh. And this is also what a lot of websites do. If you use GitHub, for example, quite a lot, then you will notice that sometimes you make a change in GitHub and it's not visible on the screen. But if you click the browser button, you click refresh, then it refreshes for you. So what have we done with Cloudflare for Joomlatools.com? When you click on the refresh button in the browser, Pages actually knows, hey, I need to refresh. I need to see if this page is still valid. And if the page is not valid anymore, Pages will regenerate it. And then we'll also send a request to Cloudflare saying, hey, remove this page from your cache because it's not valid anymore. Cloudflare removes it. The server sends the response back in the middle of that because here is Cloudflare, and here is your server. In the middle, Cloudflare receives this request again and said, okay, I'm going to recache this page because I don't have it anymore, and then send it back to you. So now you have done a full loop. You basically refresh Cloudflare by clicking your browser button.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in. Question from Eddie. You have a fairly plain setup in the demo here. Would this cause any problems if you're using a more fully featured template, perhaps Gantry 5 or one of the big U-theme ones?
No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't make any difference at all because you're just caching the output that Joomla generates. So if it works from cache, if it works in your browser, it can work from cache. I'm basically not doing anything else with that. So no.
Okay, so could you talk us quickly through how Joomlatools.com is set up? Do you have a Joomla site where you type in your blog posts, or are you typing in GitHub, and then you have a Joomla install with pages installed, and then Cloudflare is sitting in front of it? Can you talk us through the actual, the kind of optimal setup that you have running on Joomlatools.com at the moment?
So we're developers, right? We love non-UIs. So we use for writing our blog posts, we use something called HackMD. And can you see this? Yeah, I'm still in the right window, right?
Yes.
So we call a tool called HackMD. It's a Markdown editor. And it's a little bit like Google Docs. It's a collaborative Markdown editor. It's freely available. You can log in with your GitHub account. So this is a Markdown editor that just allows you to edit Markdown here, and then you see the results on the right, and you can work with multiple people on that. They have an integration where you can pull and push from GitHub, so you can actually pull a file from GitHub and you can push to it. So that basically allows you to edit on GitHub. That's what we use. It's a little bit more of a developer flow, but it works quite well for us. Then I'll show you Joomlatools.com itself. Let me switch quickly to PHP Storm. Can you see this? This is now my.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this is Joomlatools.com, and this is the site itself. This is all the content. So basically Pages, I'm not there yet, I'm working on that. We're also doing a small intranet with Pages, like for our own internal documentation. Pages is able to run multi-site environments in one Joomla installation. It's explained in the documentation. It's not that hard. You can basically tell Pages where to take the content from. So in this case, I have Joomlatools.com, and I'm also working on Team. And then the content sits here. Go ahead.
Yeah, this file and folder directory you're showing us looks, if you'd have shown me that directory, I would have said it was almost a Drupal 8 site with the sites directory and a multi-site running out of the sites directory there.
Yeah, well, Drupal has figured that out quite well, how to structure different sites. So why would we reinvent the wheel if we can just borrow that idea from them? But yeah, it's a little bit that idea. So sites, and then Joomlatools.com, and then the server is set up to handle that. So we have, this is the Apache configuration that handles all the routing and the rerouting for Joomlatools.com. So again, what I'm showing you here is very, very custom, because again, we're developers, right? So don't get the idea that with Pages, I'm trying to build something where you also need to do all of these things. Pages can just work in any Joomla installation. And if you don't use the caching, that's fine. It will work very well. But it also allows you to do all these things if you know how technically they work.
Does it have a particularly good use case at the moment for is there a type of site that you would really recommend Pages for? Is it for people that are doing a lot of publishing? Is it for people, maybe e-commerce might be difficult at the moment, companies who are running high traffic, high performance websites in Joomla?
I think it can be beneficial for okay, I'll put it different. I'm trying to build it in such a way that any Joomla developer can have benefits from it. And I would love to hear from other Joomla developers and web integrators what their problems are developing websites with Joomla and how we can help fix those. I'm working with a couple people. We have this very small community going right now where we're working on problems that they have. Like I'm having this specific project. Is this something that Pages can help me with? And yes, how can we make it so that that really works? And these are the things that I'm helping these people with. And it's just really fun to hear like the problems that people have, and then helping them to solve those with Pages. So maybe I need to give you a couple more examples to show you what it all can do.
Go for it.
So you have more of a mindset in all the flexibilities that are there. Can you see my browser again?
Yes, we can see the plain Joomla demo site.
All right, I'll start with that. Right. So I'll show you this. This is just a single file where the content sits on the file system. So let's take a little bit more of an interesting example with articles. Let's go there first. All right. So in this Joomla site, I don't have much content yet because my timing was a little bit limited preparing while I was setting it up, but I have this one article here, Joomla article, and I have the uncategorized category in Joomla. I have created a page in Pages that is going to list the categories. And then from there is going to list the articles, and then it's actually going to show that article, which is how Joomla works today, right? You set up a category listing, it shows a list of categories. You click on a category, it shows a list of articles. You click on an article, it shows the article. Exactly the same scenario. So this was go back here. So this is the list of categories. I only have uncategorized right now. Click on it. There's only one article in there. I'm now in the uncategorized category. I click on that, and this is that article. Right? I've added a little link here to basically go back to the category, and that might not work anymore because I've changed it. Yes. So there we are. So this data is coming from the database. It's not coming. It's not sitting in a file on the file system. So if that's clear, then what do I want to add to that? Look at the URLs. One problem that Joomla has is that you want to be able to get control over your URLs. Okay. So what you do for that is you install Sev extensions, and they help you quite a lot to solve that, but it's still not easy. You need to configure the Sev extension, and they take quite a lot of resources, and you don't always have enough control over URLs, and there's a lot of configuration that goes in. The URLs here are configured through Pages. So this URL is my entry point, collection articles. This URL /2, which is the ID of the category, is configured through the routing in Pages. And this URL is articles /2, which is the ID of the category, /test, which is the alias of the article, is configured through Pages. I'll try to show you how that works in code so you have an idea about the feel of what this can do. So let's switch back to the code editor. So when you set up Pages, you will create a Joomlatools Pages folder. You can change that to anything that you like, but this is the default. In that Joomlatools Pages folder, there's a couple of folders that are going to be there by default. This is very similar to Graph. Andy did a great job on that, so I basically took the idea. After all, this is where good ideas are for. In that Joomlatools Pages folder, you put a Pages folder. This is where your actual pages go. So what I did was I had /collection /articles. So I have Pages /collection /articles. Right? If you have been working with Dreamweaver before and you know how static sites work, this is the same thing. I put in an index.html PHP file. This does two things. One, it tells Pages that whatever is going to be rendered here is HTML. And two, the rendering engine that I'm going to use is PHP. So I can use PHP code in this file. Other solutions are plain HTML or Markdown. You can also use Markdown and render it from Markdown. But in this case, it's a PHP file. Now, you don't need to know much PHP, but it gives you the opportunity to do a little bit of PHP work. Now, what is happening here is very simple. I'm rendering a list of categories and with a little bit of HTML and a route call in the middle, right? There's one thing that is a little bit specific here because I already wanted to show what Pages can do. I'm defining a collection. The collection defines where the data is going to come from. This collection is not a database collection. It's a web service collection. And to make it simple, I'll first change it to this.
So this could be pulling from Help Scout or GitHub or Joomla database or WordPress database or.
Yeah, but I'll make it simple and go to the most simple example and just. You're right that, again, this is called front matter. Graph works in the same way. Jekyll works in the same way. A lot of systems today, flat file systems, static site systems are working. So I took that idea of front matter and put it into Pages. So in a page, you're going to be able to add a block of front matter on the top that is basically going to tell the page what to do. And you don't need to write code for that. You just configure it through front matter. So in this case, we're telling Pages to create a collection, and the model that it needs to use for that is a database model. So it needs to get data from some database, and then we're telling it which database table to use. It's the categories table in Joomla. Now, in the categories table in Joomla, there's a lot of categories in there, and they're not only content-related categories. So I'm going to filter this, and I'm going to say the extension is content, and the published state is one. I want to see the published categories and not anything else. This is just a simple filter on that. And that basically renders the listing that that you just saw. So if I switch this back to make sure that I'm not showing anything that isn't there. So we go here. So there we are, right? So this uncategorized is coming from the database, right? Now, the next step is if I click on that, I'm going to go to the page that shows me the articles in that category. So this is what happens here. This is the URL that I'm generating. I'm basically saying, take this category ID because I have my collection with categories. Take the category ID, render the title, take the ID, and push that ID in my route. And then render a URL for this page, collection, articles, category. Collection, articles, category. This page has a route definition that basically says collection, articles, category ID. And the category ID is dynamic. You can give it any category ID. Following? So by that, this page can now render articles from different categories. So in our case, it is collection articles 2 because the category ID is 2. And then I have a little bit more code here again to render the articles that are in this category. I'm using the database table content here because I want to render a list of articles. So basically, give me all the articles where the category ID is in this part of my URL, and where the state is 1, basically meaning published, right? And that is what is happening here. And then we do this all over again. We're basically taking this page, collection articles article, because we now want to render an individual article. Scrolling a little bit. We're going to give it the category ID because it's going to need to create a URL with category ID and with alias. So give me the category ID and give me the alias and combine those into a URL. So route it here and render the title. If we go to this page, collection articles article, then you see this. And then you see that the route for this is collection articles, then a digit, category ID, which is a number. I'm filtering it here as a digit so that the router knows how to properly route this. And then an alias at the end, which needs to be there. And then, of course, again, my collection definition, I want to have data coming from content table, and it needs to be published. So what is going to happen now is Pages is basically going to go fetch data from the content table, which are your articles. He's going to use the category ID and use the alias to find the individual article. And we just render that here. We take the title of the article. We don't need to do a for each because there's only one result. So we could simply do collection title, and we can do collection intro text and collection category ID. And the title, category ID, and intro text are fields or columns in your database. All right, so this is what Joomla stores in its database. And there you are. You just rendered the same thing what content did. You rendered in 3 little pages with a little bit of code.
Okay, I can see why this is hard to name. It is both static and dynamic at the same time. Yeah, a fundamentally different approach from Grav, for example.
Right. So this part, what I'm showing you now, is in a sense a combination of getting data from a data source and then just rendering it. So Pages is what you could call data centric. There is no HTML that it generates, like what Joomla does. So Joomla component will output HTML that you can override. Pages doesn't output any HTML. It's your HTML. I don't care. But it will give you data.
So we got a question from Owen. He asks,
Sure.
how is the styling of this content handled? Would you handle it at the theme layer? So I guess this would be Protostar in this case. Or does Pages have a styling approach?
No styling. I'm a developer, not a designer.
Okay.
No, seriously, the idea is, again, going back to Joomlatools.com, our designers wanted to have full control in the way that the site was being styled and being rendered. So they wanted to decide what the HTML looked like, and they wanted to decide which CSS classes to put on there, and how the whole styling worked. So Pages doesn't output any HTML. Well, a little bit. There's a couple of filters that I show you later to render a table of contents, but that's about it, which is very standard HTML in a sense. All the rest and all the other HTML is up to you. So you don't overwrite, you create. That's the big difference with how Joomla works today. When we did Joomla 1.5, we built that override mechanism that you could do a template override for an existing component. In Pages, you don't overwrite anything because there's nothing there. You take data from wherever and you decide how you want to render that data.
So,
sorry to interrupt. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it, Owen.
So are we saying if you create this Pages that you've got on the screen, we would have to add the correct classes or else it wouldn't show up styled correctly, right? And
Yes.
It's going to get that styling from the theme that Joomla has already.
Yes, if you want to do it that way, yes. Then you need to know which classes that if like in the context where you're gonna want to do this with a team, you're gonna need to know which are the classes that a specific team uses to style, and then you're gonna need to apply those. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's the way it will work. So the idea there actually is that you would have the freedom, like either you go with an existing team and you understand and know what their classes are, and hopefully they have some documentation for that. Otherwise, they might need to start doing that. Or you can go with a completely different styling approach. You could say, I'm going to use plain Bootstrap, or I'm going to use Tailwind, or I'm going to use any other CSS framework to create my site. And I'm not going to use a Joomla template anymore. The benefit of that is performance. Of course, there is budget and there is a time that involves in that, and your customer is going to need to be willing to pay for that. But he's going to get performance in return. Joomlatools.com could only be so fast by hand coding and handcrafting all our markup, and hand coding and handcrafting all our CSS.
You're getting close to making Joomla a headless system in this case, where it's just the database storage and very little else is coming from Joomla.
Do you have a minute? I'll show you that.
Okay.
So that's a good question. So what I was doing here was I was using are we still, yeah, you're still seeing my editor, right? Because I don't know anymore how much time I switched. Great. Yeah. So this collection earlier, we used the database. Now we're going to do something different. We're going to make Pages render the category listing as an API in a headless way. And then we're going to make Pages consume that again to render itself. Now, this is, of course, not something you want to do because it creates a lot of extra overhead. But for the purpose of demo, it's a nice way of showing you how it works. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to show you the. So this. There. So Pages can take, because Pages is data-centric and doesn't care about markup, it can transform any data into valid JSON. It actually can transform this into JSON and into CSV files. I'll show you that later. So here, I'm taking the data out of the database based on the filtering that I have defined, and I'm rendering JSON. The JSON that you see here is valid JSON API. It's the same JSON that actually Drupal, or the same JSON standard that Drupal uses for his REST API. I only have one category, but this is the category you see here.
So Joomla 3 doesn't come with an API. It's almost as if Pages is building in an API system that works with Joomla 3?
Yeah, it can do that. Yeah. But so the thing that I wanted to do was build something that allows me, because I don't really know yet when Joomla 4 is going to be there and what Joomla 4 is going to bring, and I have problems to solve right now. I want to be able to consume APIs, and I want to be able to generate APIs, and I want to be able to do that in a backwards compatible way. I don't want to need to wait until a third-party developer has had the time and the resources to create a REST API integration with whatever is going to come. I can do that right now. I just talk to his database, get the data out, and there you have it. I can filter this. I can filter this information further if I don't want to expose all of it. I can rewrite it with a little bit of code I can, and you have a completely working REST API.
Yeah, Joomla 4 will come with a REST API, but each developer will need to integrate their own extensions with it. And that might be a long, slow process if it ever happens.
Yeah, that could be a little bit of a problem. So here you have a solution that doesn't care about that, right? A developer, actually I'm working with Photos from K2 to optimize K2, and I'll show you that in a bit because we did a little bit of a test with K2 to optimize output of K2 for pages, both from a JSON perspective in a headless kind of way as internally through an extension. So yeah, that all becomes possible. The idea here is that if there is no solution, you can go to the database and get the data. Then the data is a little bit more raw and you need to polish it in some cases. Or the developer has created a little extension or plugin, and then we can just, or an API, and then we can just talk to that. So you have the choice. Now, to finish up, so what I is going to show us what is happening right now is, so Pages is rendering this JSON file. And it's using that JSON file to render this page. So the data is basically first being transformed into JSON, and then I'll make a second request to render this page. Of course, you don't want to do that on your own site. It would be a little bit stupid if you have the data in your own database. But this is an example of how you can use data from a third party to render. And then I'll show you how we did that with Photos. This bar needs to go because it's in my way. Where is K2? There. So this is K2, the site, Photos' site, the showcase site. It shows a listing of sites that are using K2. Great. What maybe not a lot of you know is that K2 is capable of rendering JSON. It's not JSON API format, but it's JSON. So this is the JSON coming out of K2, the site. And then I'll switch back again to my little code editor. So what I did was I created a little K2 collection. This is my K2 collection. And I'm basically saying, okay, use the web service model and go fetch me this URL.
Huh.
Now, there's one problem here. The data that Photos is generating isn't standard, right? So Pages doesn't really know where the data items are. You need to tell it that. And in Photos' JSON format, he is using an element called items, and this is where his actual data listing is. So I'm telling Pages to go fetch data from this items array, and then just do a little for each, title, created, and intro text, and just render me that. And then you also see here that Pages has a number of functions that you can use. This is a function, a template function. This is a date function. It will transform it will transform a raw date into a humanly readable date by default. You could do more with it, but that's what it does. This is part of the template layer. So if I switch back, then so this is our format, and then you see here, you see this items array. This is where actually the items are. These are all the items. There's a lot of information per item. So I'm just choosing to the title and the intro text. That's the information. And then the created date is the information I'm showing. And then you get this. There you are.
Okay, that is pretty cool.
Right?
Well, everything is you've shown today is pretty cool, but that was an especially nice little demo.
Yeah, and I'm not done yet. I'm just like only 1/3 to my demos. But yeah, so this gives you an idea of consuming information that comes from a third party.
Well, we probably don't have too much longer today. We've got a couple of questions from people in the chat here.
Sure.
One of them is from Rich. He's wondering if Pages can handle situations where certain content is shown only to visitors with different ACL levels.
Yes. So there are two ways of doing that. One, you can limit access to a specific page based on, let me show you the page here. So there's a lot of front matter that you can define. One of the things that you can define is access.
Okay.
And with access, you can define roles. Roles are the access levels in Joomla. I call them roles because it seems a more logical name. So these are the roles and the groups, and they mix together. So a user, here you're basically saying everything is public. So public role and public groups, but you can limit per group or multiple groups, or you can limit per role or multiple roles, depending on how you want to limit the access to this specific page. That's one way of doing it. And then the second way of doing it is a little bit, there's a little bit of coding in that, and I still need to make that a little bit easier, but you could do something like this. Object, user, and then you can start talking to the ACL from there. This actually talks to the Joomla user object. So you could ask, I think the API is get role or has role X. So then you can do something like this, right? If the logged in user has the role member, then this is not going to work because, of course, this doesn't exist in the site, but just to give you some pseudo code here. And then do render you are a member, right? So that's the way that you could do it through code. Then you can basically start rendering information for a specific user and then take ACL into account.
Awesome. I got a question from Mark, who's just looking for some clarification. He's saying that with Pages, you have a Joomla website where part of the website comes from regular Joomla, the CSS, the theme, presumably, and then another part of the website is coming from MD files. Is that correct? Does he understand it right?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, right? So you can use all those. So your data can come from anywhere. It can come from 3 different locations. It can come from the file system, as I've shown you, which are Markdown files, pure HTML files, or any kind of file that sits on the file system the data can come from. The second way is the data can come from the database. I've shown you how to connect with the Joomla database tables and get data out of it. You can connect with any database table in Joomla. That means also a third-party component. And I've shown you how to get data out of another website or a web service using the web service collection, so you can get that data in. And then you mix and match that data up in the way that you want that. I'll show you one more example. This here is this. This is a Google, I need to switch. I'm not gonna show you that otherwise. Now I need to figure out where the Google spreadsheet is. Oh, there. You see this? Right.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so this is a Google spreadsheet that I created. Just filled it with some dummy data. And I've shared this Google spreadsheet using the publish as, so you can basically in Google, you can do publish to the web, and then I've published it as a CSV file. And then I've gone to Pages and I've basically told Pages to take that data. There you are, Google. So then I've basically told Pages to take this URL. This is the URL of my output CSV file, and basically take that and just render it. And I'm telling Pages to limit it at 20, so only show the first 20, and then show a little bit of a paginator so that you can paginate it and show me the first name, last name, and profession, and just go through it. So if we go back to the site, then the data that you see now is coming from Google. It's coming from that sheet, and I can go to the next page, and then it's going to get the next 20 and the next 20, and these are all the ones that I have. I can do even more with that. If you saw in the sheet, I have added, so the last one is called a filter. It's called the profession. So the column is profession in my sheet. So give me all the doctors. Did I write it right? Yes. So give me all the doctors, or better yet, give me all the Jedis. And then there's only one, of course.
That's probably half a dozen times in this presentation I've sat back and thought, wow, that's really nicely done.
Right, and then let's turn this sheet into JSON. There you are. So this is the JSON representation, the JSON API representation of the data that sits in this file. So I can basically turn a CSV into JSON and then use it somewhere else. I could also filter this again in the same way that I was filtering it. So I could say I could filter it on profession again. And that's not all. I can also turn this into a CSV, but I could turn it into a filtered CSV. So I want to have a CSV file from only the doctors. There you are. And then I need to switch probably to showing you that on my desktop. Then I'm gonna, so you should now see the result, right?
That's just a very cool
right?
And flexible format. Oh, very cool way of doing things.
Yeah. So now that's like, these are all like things that you could do with this. So it's not a static site, and this is why I don't want to. It's very hard to call it. Like, this is why I call it a page generator. You're basically generating pages, because a JSON file is also a page. A CSV file is also a page in a sense. It's web publishing, right? You're publishing something to the web in a specific format. Shall I do one more? I have a few more. I'll go through them without switching back and forward. This is a Google document. This is a published Google Doc. I'll show you the link to the doc. Page Google. So this is the link to this document. This is a published Google Doc. And what I'm doing here is the following. I'm taking this Google Doc from this URL, and I'm transforming this into HTML. I'm building together with the community, we're building an HTML XML parser. So you can basically take like any page on the internet and then just extract information from it. So I'm taking the doc here.
Almost like a little web scraper.
Yeah, it's a mini web scraper. So you're transforming the URL into HTML, and then you're basically saying, take the text as HTML at title, because I want to set the title, and then transform this into an article. So take this content, remove the attributes, and remove some stuff that Google Docs adds that you don't want, and just render it. And then it renders it on the page. So if you go to the browser, so this is the doc itself. So this is the actual published doc, and the result is this, right? If I would make changes to this document, then they would appear here if I would refresh this. That's one other example. Let's see what else I have. I have quite a lot. Forms, maybe quickly. Like, how do you do forms? Like, a lot of people, when they do forms, they need to install form components into Joomla, which is great, but then they can do quite a lot and very complex things that they just cannot do yet. But a simple website often has a contact form, and you just want to be able to show that. Why are you not running? Oh, there you are. So how do you build a very simple form? So this is a very simple form. First name, a name, and email address. Show you the code. quite quickly for this form. So this form, this is my form definition. Very basic, just my form, first name. I have a honeypot included. This is a little feature that I added to prevent spam. This actually filters out 99.99.99% of spam. We haven't had any spam anymore on those forms since I introduced this. And I'm not using anything else to filter out form spam. It's a little nifty thing. It basically adds a field and then checks if that field was filled in. It's like a hidden field. If the field was filled in, it's coming from a spam bot, and otherwise it's coming from a human. It's quite easy to do, and spam bots are, I figured out, actually quite dumb. So this is your form. What I'm doing here is I'm having a form element in my front matter, name for the form, and I'm defining two processors, a CSV processor and an email processor. So I'm going to store the contents of the submission to CSV, and I'm going to send an email to this person. Then I have a little bit of a schema. Basically says I have a first name, a last name, and an email. The first name is a string, the last name is a string, the email is an email, and they're all three required. If you would fill it in without any of those three, it will error and say, this is not working because there is something that is required that is needed. There's a redirect to another page with a thank you after success, and then this is the name for the honeypot that you need to add to make the honeypot work. So
cool. Well, I have probably three questions.
Sure.
To wrap this up. One is from Mark, a follow-up to his earlier question. How does this work if you have an existing Joomla site? What would the process be of considering converting an old Joomla site to use Pages?
So that depends, like how far you want to go with your conversion. Like you don't necessarily need to convert. You can continue using what is in the old site and step by step start optimizing it, right? The word for that today, the hyped word today is actually hybrid CMS. It's where you have an older CMS system that you don't want to completely replace with something new, but you want to gradually go from the old to the new. For example, in this case, because I want to be able to create a REST API from the data that already sits in my old system. So you can do that step by step. If you want to do that in a whole, then the first question becomes like, what data is going to be where? That's the first question. Is there data that actually isn't edited much, that I'm the only one editing because I'm the web designer? That data could go into flat files. And I see that a lot, right? There's a lot of sites where people are using articles and putting modules in articles and putting styling around it and editing all that and publishing on Joomla sites, that there as the editor and the designer are only changing. There's no reason to have it in an article. You could just put it into a flat file. So that's the first one. The second one, which data is going to be edited by my clients, by my customers, by my content editors? That data, of course, needs to go somewhere so that it can be edited. Then it can go into your Joomla backend. It can still be managed by the articles component or by K2 or by any other component that manages content. Or you can move it into a third-party system. Like if you want to move it somewhere else, if you want to move it into a Prismic or into a Strapi or somewhere else, you could, and then just gather the content back in. So those are the two main questions that you have, right? Do I have static content that I'm actually not managing in that way? Can I move it and make it static? And where and how are people going to update my site? Where is that content going to come from? And then you basically just go from there.
Awesome. Question from John. You mentioned a few times that you are focused on solving problems for developers. Could you just break that down quickly? What are the specific problems that you're trying to solve versus a standard Joomla install?
Well, step one, all the performance problems. Anything that has to do with performance, like out of the box, Joomla is slow. You can turn it upside down, but Joomla is slow, and it's not on par anymore with the performance that we would expect on the internet today. So that's a big problem and a big challenge to solve. Caching is one of the hardest problems to solve. We have tried to do it for 1.5. We miserably failed at it, probably also because we didn't have enough time to really do it, but it didn't get there. And I'm still not completely there, but getting very close to getting a fully transparent caching system working. Where, as we were talking about earlier, where the cache knows when data changes, and it updates itself. That would be the holy grail, right? That it would just work. So I'm trying to get there. That's problem number 1. 2, problems like what we call modulitis, right? I see a lot of people creating Joomla sites with basically throwing in a couple of hundred modules and then putting them on all the different places in the site. This is something that I haven't shown yet, but Pages can solve that. You can create modules through code in Pages. You can basically define a module and it will put it in place. I'm not showing you the definite, but here, this is an example of that without actually showing you how it works. But you can basically start defining module positions and creating modules on the fly through Pages. You can push content into module positions through Pages by basically saying, here's a piece of content, push it into module position X. So you don't need to set up modules anymore. You don't need to deal and manage all those modules because they become really, really hard to work with. That's another problem that I'm trying to solve. And then anything that has to do with the next steps in the web, right? We're evolving towards what we call headless CMS systems, decoupled CMS systems, and there's all the buzzwords. Then you have what you call a hybrid CMS system. These are things that Joomla cannot do today. And the challenge is that how can you make Joomla do that in a backwards compatible way? Like, how can you output a REST API from data that sits in a database? Any piece of data that sits in that database, that opens up the possibilities for Joomla quite a lot. How can you start doing things like this? This is something that I worked on with, I'll just show you the code, not how it works, but so things like this. One of the guys I'm working with is collecting signups. Basically, the problem that he was is, I want to have a workflow where a user comes to my site, fills in a form with his name, his email and his email address, and we then create a user for him in the user database, and we send his information through a CRM. How do you do that? In a most simple way. Well, these are two little processors, form processors that we created. This is a form processor that creates the user in Joomla. This is just a little bit of code. And once you have written it once, you can just copy paste it and it will work for you. So this is the whole idea with Pages, that you don't need to install anything anymore, right? You just copy paste it, put it into the right file, and it will work. And this is the active campaign. This is sending information to active campaign, sending the user information there so that the user generated. This is all in, was an hour and a half of work, and it's less than 100 lines of code to get that done. If you need to do that in Joomla today, it's possible though, but then you need to install RS Forms, you need to install a plugin in RS Forms that can create the user. Then you need to figure out a way to create the user in an active campaign through that. There's a lot of in-betweens that you need to work with. There's a lot of moving parts to that. While here it's 100 lines of code in a sense to do that. It's another one. And a last one I'm working on is all the XML processing. This is a huge use case. How do you take XML data coming from an old school 90s publishing system that publishes medical journals in XML, and how you transform that XML into a Joomla site?
What can we expect from Joomlatools this year? With the Pages system, beyond the caching, what other cool things are coming?
Like all the stuff that I've basically now shown you is something that we worked on for the last year. That is basically done. So I would like to get into the hands of more people and see what they do with that. What is still on the list of things to do? There are two more things that I'm working on to finish. One, I want to make a tighter integration with the article system in Joomla. Right now, you're talking to the Joomla database table, which is a little bit crude because you get the raw data from the database table. So I want to build an integration with the Joomla API so that you get more refined data from that. Second request that I got was to be able to do filtering on tags. So there are tags in the database. Can I filter the database collection on tags, which is something that that we cannot do yet, and Joomla cannot really do yet in that way. And also from a REST perspective. And then third, authentication. The final piece for the REST API is the ability to authenticate, basically being able to add a password username or an API token or whatever form of authentication, so that you can hide your APIs behind an authenticator and not have them public, which is the case still right now. Those are the three missing parts. For all the rest, if you go to the wiki, you will find in the boards on GitHub. I'll show you that.
Oh yeah, that was going to be my fourth and final question. If people, and we've had a lot of people hang on all the way to the end.
That's good.
They seem really excited by this. So if someone is really excited by this, how can they get involved? How can they keep in touch with what you guys are up to with Joomlatools Pages?
So the best way of following is, like, first you can become a watcher on the GitHub repo. I think you now see my browser, right?
Yeah.
Again, yeah. So you can become a watcher on the GitHub repo, and then you can basically, how do I do that? You can basically go here, and then you can be a watcher on releases only, for example. Then you will be notified when releases come out. That's a good first step. If you click on watching, then basically you're going to see all the activity in the repo, and that might be a little bit too much, but the releases are nice. Then if you go into the wiki, there is a very, very, very simple quick start. Basically shows you, you go to the installation.
Okay, so everything is run through GitHub at the moment. The
yes, everything is run to
the
GitHub.
code.
Yeah, there is. You go to the installation, you go to the quick start, and then for the community part, you click on community, and then you will find the Google group that I'm running and the GitHub chat where you can ask questions.
Awesome. Well, you got a shout out from Jonathan in the chat. I've been working with Joomlatools Pages for a while, and it's a game changer. It's made me excited about programming again.
Yeah, Jonathan is super excited about all the XML and HTML parsing we've been building together, which was an interesting challenge. Working on that a couple of weeks, so that was quite fun.
Cool. Well,
fantastic.
Johan, Owen, you're about to jump in there too?
I just said fantastic.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, Johan, thank you so much indeed. We will get this video up. We'll put it on YouTube so that more people can watch and find out about Joomlatools Pages. And I hope you guys who are watching will head over to GitHub and follow what Johan and his team are doing.
Can I add one more to that?
Go for it.
Last thing I remember. So what I'm going to do is the little demo that I showed you with all the examples, I'm going to put them into a special GitHub repository. I'll tweet it, and I'll let you know where it is. So you can basically just copy paste that, put it into a Joomla site, and then play with anything and everything that I've basically shown you today.
Very cool.
You could just go from there. And then second, we're working on something really, really cool, which wasn't done yet today, but I wanted to show you, which is called Gitpod. We're going to make it possible to basically run a whole Joomla with a click of a button on a Git repository. If you want to figure out more about it, go to gitpod.com, which is a very nice, interesting tool.
Gitpod?
Yes. It kind of already works, but I can quickly try to show you. So we want to make it very, very easy for people to collaborate, right? So this is what we're working on. You see this Gitpod button here? All right.
Oh, so
click that.
gitpod.io.
Yes. This starts a whole developer environment in the cloud. So even if you don't want to go to the trouble of setting up Joomla, copying the code, and all of that, there will be a repository online in the coming weeks where you just click a button, and you get a completely working Joomla for you with a virtual Visual Studio environment to code and play in. Will be a Pages playground in a way that you could just tinker with, and that will also allow other people in the community to help out each other, because then you can just can go in. So this is that. This thing is the Joomlatools Pages Git repository, and then open in browser. It gives an error right now.
But that should be available fairly soon.
Yeah, we're tinkering with it. It's almost going to be done, and hopefully next week.
Awesome. Well, all the best with this in in 2020, Johan. You've got a lot of people excited, and we look forward to seeing what you do with it this year.
Thank you.